Hi, and welcome to Dutch, the podcast. My name is Mike. Right there is Tom Byfoot. He is the publisher of Dutch publications that you're aware of, De Krant. Also, Dutch, the magazine, and of course, Mokum Publishing. Many different publications, all available under that same roof. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Mike. How are you? Yeah, you see, I couldn't wait to jump in there. Yeah, you mentioned it all. DutchTheMedia.com is where you get our books and our magazine.
Very good. And in fact, it is also where you can reach out. And by the way, we started to get some feedback in the way of emails to the show. That was very exciting for us.
It was very exciting. People definitely picking up on the topics of the show. And that's after 2. I mean, we're recording number 4, but number 3 hasn't even gone out yet.
It's true.
Stay posted for it because it will be there very soon. Well, before you hear this.
That is true. So if you haven't heard it, go back and give it a view or have a listen to it. By the way, subscribe wherever it is you're catching the podcast today, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Google, maybe you're on Spotify, or maybe just right here on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe. If you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the notification button, and you'll be told when the next episode is up and ready to go.
And if I can just add there, Mike, so use that, get in touch with us, suggest topics for this podcast, suggest guests for this podcast, or ask questions about previous podcasts. Use DutchTheMedia.com's contact form, and that's the best way to get a hold of us.
And there you go. You can see the graphic right there. We'll leave it up for a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, anything in the way of upcoming stories that you'd like to talk about for the publication? Anything cooking out there, Tom, that is in the works at the moment?
Well, literally cooking, actually. Last episode, we talked to Anne Frost from Pella, Iowa. In the upcoming issue of Dutch the Magazine, we've got 4 Pella, Iowa recipes. 2 cookie recipes, 1 for a salad, and 1 for a meat dish. All from Dutch, what was it called again? The Heart of Dutch America, Pella, Iowa.
Yeah, the what do they call it? The
America's Dutch Treasure.
Well, Tom, we really did pull that together just now, you and I. Well done.
But that's not what we're talking about today, right?
No, in fact, today we have another guest. Just a fascinating interview that you had done just not too long ago with a very special artist, and you put a very cool perspective on this interview. So I'm excited to share that with people. Before we get into that, a quick point that I wanted to ask you about this several weeks ago when we were talking about other things. I have a memory from the Netherlands I wanted to share with you.
Go ahead.
I was in Amsterdam, over 1,200 bridges in Amsterdam. Did you know that, Tom?
I knew there were lots, but I had never counted them.
Over 1,200. I try to get my Dutch facts together before the show if I can.
And did you cross them all?
I tried. I probably crossed over many of them just trying to find the place I had rented. But it's a great experience. It's a lovely wander around Amsterdam. And one evening, I saw something that I never in my life saw to this degree. And that was...
What was that? I can imagine.
It was... No, not that, Tom. It was Aurora Borealis in the sky. I mean, like a laser light show.
Absolutely. That is, you know what? I lived in Amsterdam for many years, and I have never, actually to this point, even living in Canada, I've never seen Aurora Borealis.
Incredible blue hues, black.
That must have been beautiful.
Throughout the evening. Yeah, I just wondered if it was something common because I thought, wow, this is really sort of the icing on the cake for this trip into Amsterdam to have that experience in the evening. And I know what you're thinking. But no, legitimately, it was Aurora Borealis. Not just because I was in.
Okay. No, I'm not. I haven't had that experience, unfortunately. I'd love to see that.
Well, I hope you do at some point. But I just thought I'd share that with you. It was, and just to make a segue, my thought was, what a beautiful photograph. And I do have photographs of it. I would be happy to share as well with you.
Put them on.
What a beautiful painting of Amsterdam this would be with this background behind it. And sure enough, that's what triggered my memory of this, because today we're actually going to delve into the art realm.
Yeah, and before we do that, I would like to set the scene a little bit, because that's I think important to understanding the exhibition on the book, art book we're talking about tonight. So today, you mentioned that I spoke to an artist called Rosemary Sloat, Rosemary Sloot, as her name would be pronounced here. At the event, actually, at an event at the Dutch shop in Burlington, when they were celebrating their 65th anniversary. We were out there, and Rosemary was there to sign her books, and I was there to sign my books as well. And so thank you very much to the Dutch shop on New Street in Burlington for allowing us to do that. But it also gave us the opportunity to talk to Rosemary, and you'll hear that interview in a few minutes. Rosemary was born in Simcoe, Ontario, but she came here in her mother's pregnant belly, actually, across the ship. Wasn't even allowed at the time. You weren't supposed to take that cross-Atlantic trip if you're pregnant, but I don't know how they got around it, but she came anyway. It's not a very well-known fact, but after the war, after the Second World War, the Netherlands was completely destroyed. It had suffered a lot from German occupation. A lot of the infrastructure had been destroyed, partially because of battles and fighting and bombings, but also partially because the German occupiers had really literally dragged off everything. All the trains, all the locomotives, all the harbor installations, dragged them off to Germany, where they subsequently got destroyed in Allied bombing. So the country was devastated. There was a huge housing shortage. There was a huge shortage of work. There was obviously a lot of work that needed to be done, but they were counting in decades rather than in years before the country would be reconstructed. So the Dutch government decided, we have too many people. Now, it's weird if you think about it, because there were 10 million people in the Netherlands at the time, and there's 17.5 million now. But in 1950, 5 years after the war, Queen Juliana at the time, in her speech from the throne announcing government policy, she actually read, and I wrote it down, the significant increase in our population and the limitations of available land continue to demand a powerful encouragement of emigration. So basically, the Dutch government was telling their own citizens, we want you to leave. And this may sound exaggerated, but it's not. I was in the Netherlands a few years ago when a new exhibition opened in the famous Open Air Museum in Arnhem. And the exhibition was called We Are Going to Canada. And it focuses on that post-war immigration wave. One person who was there to open the exhibition was Princess Margriet. She is the sister of the former Queen of the Netherlands. And she was born in Canada. She was born in Ottawa. It's a whole separate story. I cover it in my book, just to drop that in there. She was born in the Ottawa Civic
Hidden in
Hospital.
plain sight, now available at Mokum Publishing. Sorry, anyway.
That's the one. And I also write about the exhibition that I'm talking about right now. Anyway, I got the opportunity to interview her briefly after the opening, and I asked her what stood out most from the exhibition to her. And she said what stood out most to her was how intensely people were induced to leave Holland. Now, serendipity, the Canadian government had another problem. They had a shortage of farm laborers. And this was partially also a result of the war. As you know, lots of Canadian soldiers have been overseas, took part in the liberation of the Netherlands and the rest of Europe. They're still celebrated in the Netherlands, and rightly so, for what they did. But when they came back, a lot of the farm hands did not return to the farms. They went to the cities where they could make better money in factories, in the car industry, in the steel industry, in places like Hamilton. So the Canadian government has a real problem. There's huge land and a shortage of farm labor. So the Dutch and Canadian government struck a deal, and they both started to subsidize the immigration of Dutch farm labor to Canada. And in a period of less than 10 years, 200,000 Dutch people came to Canada.
That's
the highest number in... Yeah, it's huge. And the Dutch at the time were the second or third largest immigrant group. There were more Dutch coming than, say, Italians, Portuguese. And it's even said that, downtown Grimsby, Ontario, for example, where a lot of the Dutch settled, you could hear more Dutch on a Saturday afternoon downtown than English.
Even the style of homes in that area and the style of farming they did, very Dutch influenced.
Well, drive around there and you'll see almost all of the horticultural businesses
Exactly.
still have Dutch last names on them. Anyway, I'm making a long story out of this, but this is just in that wave of immigrants coming to Canada was the Sloat family, and now immigrants were induced. A lot of people came, for the adventure, for the opportunity. It's not like they were all forced, but there were a good number. I met this guy at a Dutch-Canadian Association celebration in Toronto, and I was curious. I asked him, so tell me a little bit about your immigration to Canada. He said, well, it's very simple. I was living with my in-laws in a one-bedroom apartment with my wife. We couldn't really have kids, even if we wanted to, because of the space. And if you went to the authorities, they say, well, you know what? There's a ship going to Canada in 3 weeks. And that's actually what happened to him. 3 weeks. And he was on the boat. He didn't speak a word of English. Neither did his wife. They were in their very early 20s. They got here. He didn't have much of an education to speak of. But through a friend, he got a job. Turned out he wasn't skilled enough. He got fired. His wife got pregnant. They couldn't afford hospital. This was before universal health care. And I said, well, why didn't you go back? He said, I would have crawled
Couldn't
back.
afford back
but I
home,
couldn't
yeah.
afford it.
Yeah.
Couldn't
Yeah.
afford to go back. Couldn't afford the passage. So, those stories exist. But then you drive down the highway, you see this huge Fortman cookies plant. You say, well, some of them were very successful. Harry Vortman and his brothers came from a relatively not a great well-off family, but they built a whole huge business. You can buy Vortman cookies in every store virtually in the United States and Canada. So, there's two sides of it. Anyway, long story short, I suppose.
It's a good context
Rosemary,
for this interview, for sure. You've done a great layup to this, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Now, very briefly about Rosemary then. I came across Rosemary's work when she had just finished an exhibition, and this came forth from a conversation she had had with her mother on her mother's deathbed, when her mother was on her deathbed. And I really think this is the time that I let Rosemary talk about it, and we listen to the interview, and then maybe I'll have some more comments.
All right. Here is
afterwards.
that interview live from a wonderful summer day in Burlington.
So Rosemary, one of the reasons you're out here is we published a collection of your paintings. Now, this is a very special collection, but maybe you could introduce yourself first and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career, your background in the art world before we talk specifically about the book.
Okay. I'm an artist from London, Ontario, and I've been painting and doing some teaching for 40 years, and so I've been at it for quite a while, and teaching, at various levels, elementary and high school and university, I got to.
So you've exhibited extensively before you started this immigrant collection.
Always on a part-time. I was always a part-time painting instructor, but certainly I taught at all levels, and so I really enjoyed teaching at the university level.
Okay.
More than any of the other levels.
Okay. So you have worked for a long time on a very special exhibition that you put together that showed about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's called Immigrant.
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about what it is and what the inspiration for it was?
Well, the inspiration for Immigrant was my mother's declaration when she passed away that she had only one regret in life, and that was immigrating to Canada.
Wow.
And I was born in Canada. I can't imagine not being Canadian. And she was always so brave and hardworking, and she never complained. So this came as a complete shock to me, and it really threw me for a loop. And I thought about it for some time, and then it changed the trajectory of my work. And I started an exhibition that dealt with my family's immigration experience from the Netherlands to Canada after World War II.
Wow, yeah, that must have been quite a blow, quite a revelation, really, by your mother on her deathbed.
Yeah.
So how did you process that? How did that inform your art, your work?
Well, I sort of changed what I was doing. I hadn't done anything like that before. My works had been, quite different before, more landscape, more still life, and so this was really the first time I was doing an exhibition that you might consider political in some way, in that it dealt with a very specific, issue, and that was Canadian immigration and what happened after World War II. And I thought that not enough had been said about that story, those immigration stories in Holland or in Canada.
Yes, that's one of the things that I've noticed since I moved here. We're talking about a huge movement of people in the post-war years from Holland, from the Netherlands to Canada. I believe 200,000 people came here. It's not spoken about much, and there's a lot of it's always, when people do speak about it, it's always the success story. It's always how great the Dutch did, but they forget that there was a lot of homesickness, a lot of grief that played part in that as well. And I think you capture that really, really very emotionally in your paintings. And when I remember from when I first saw your work, I felt this is something that needed a wider audience, and that's one of the reasons I think we brought out the book. Now, can you maybe walk us through the narrative flow of the exhibition a bit, because it tells a story. The paintings together tell a story.
I put 21 paintings together, and they start in the Netherlands, with my family still being in the Netherlands and enjoying happy times, pre-war times. And that's where the story starts. And then you get into the war. There's one very dark painting. My parents' wedding painting is a very dark painting because they got married during the war, only a few months after the war started in 1940. So that's the darkest piece in the show. And then there's a couple of paintings that shows their actual departure from the Netherlands and saying goodbye to family. And I tried to capture that in a couple of paintings that are, anyone who left Europe after World War II would recognize these paintings. They would see themselves in these canvases.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's the subject matter is Dutch, but it tells a universal story of immigration, adapting to a new homeland. Now,
and then I get into, what life was like in Canada, and perhaps the rest of the paintings deal with my family's first 5 years in Canada and how difficult that was, and the struggles.
And they capture you and your siblings as well. But one of the things about the paintings is also they're very layered. So you have used a layering technique where you sort of bring the different parts of the story together, bring there and here, then and now together. Can you talk a little bit about that
layering.
technique?
So I'm working from photographs that my parents took, in Holland and in Canada, and I'm using those photographs, but I'm layering them with text, little bits of letters from my grandparents in Holland, or the ship's passenger list, or other documentation that they had when they traveled across the ocean. So I've got these fragments of text, that kind of words that I'm layering over the images. And so I'm kind of playing back and forth with then and now, and visuals and text. And so they become very layered, and you can spend quite a bit of time with each painting to try and figure out the whole story as you're looking at it. And I'm also playing with focus. Some of the areas are in very sharp focus. Things that are still tangible, things that you can still be held in the hands today are in sharp focus. But anything that is no longer in existence, anything from the past, is out of focus. So sometimes when you walk into the gallery, you will see a painting and you will only see what's out of focus. You will only see what was in the past. And then when you get really close to that painting, the out of focus disappears, and all you're confronted with is what's left now.
And that's very interesting. Now you can discover that yourself in the paintings, but you do help us along in the book a little bit, right?
Oh, absolutely, because in the book, with each painting, I have written an entire page of notes that gives insight into the painting from a technical and from a conceptual perspective.
So it sort of explains what we see, but even then there's more to see. Now, I have two more questions for you, Rosemary. The first one is, what was the reaction when you showed the exhibition in various art galleries here in Ontario and in Alberta?
Mm-hmm. Well, the exhibition actually opened at the Burlington Arts Centre right here 10 years ago. And there, as we know, there is a large Dutch community in Burlington, and their support of that show was phenomenal, absolutely fantastic. They came out for it in huge numbers, and they were very, very moved by the work. Some were brought to tears by the work, and some of them liked the show so much that they followed it around. And I found the same people showing up in Ancaster or in Simcoe or in Barrie as it traveled around Ontario, and then it went out to Alberta as well.
Yeah, I was at one of the showings, and there were some tears shed, I have to say.
Yeah.
Finally, I was wondering what you're working on now, because I believe that having started work on Immigrant is also giving the rest of your work a slightly different direction. Is that right?
Well, yes. I think I am still dealing with the past and things that transpired in the very early years in Canada, and so yes, I'm still in that mindset where I'm looking at my parents' experience and my experience in our very early first years in Canada.
Yeah, in your artist statement in the beginning of the book, and that also went with the exhibition, you pose a few questions that you really hadn't thought about before. Why don't I have an extended family of cousins around me? What did this do to all those other Dutch immigrants who came under the similar circumstances?
Yeah, well, I had quite an unexpected reaction to my mother's death and her declaration, because that ended the generation of the Dutch immigrants that came over at that time. And all our family was still in Holland. And I was overwhelmed by this unexpected feeling of abandonment in a foreign land. And I was born here.
You were born here, right?
I was born here, and and I thought, what are we doing here? The family is in Holland. You know, at that time when we were losing my mother and my uncle, that was the end of it. And what were we doing here when everybody else was still in Europe? And it was a very unexpected feeling of abandonment, but that's what you go through when you're an immigrant, or the children of immigrants. or now the grandchildren of immigrants. My nieces and nephews are dealing with this now, where they're looking at this exhibition and finding out their family's history. You know, they're young now, they're in their 30s and 40s, and they're interested in finding out more about their parents and their grandparents' story. So they're very interested in this exhibition.
Well, that's great. It's great talking to you, Rosemary. Thank you very much for talking to us, and good luck with the project you're working on at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thanks. I thought it was fascinating when I first came across her. So the exhibition, as you heard, was started or was first shown about a decade ago, about 10 years ago. The paintings still stand, but what of course happens over time is some of the paintings get sold. I personally bought one myself. I've got it hanging in my office, and maybe I'll share that. But the other thing I felt is as you heard, the exhibition in its totality tells a story, but the individual pictures are now spread out. So I thought they should be brought back together again. And I talked to Rosemary. I said we should put a book out with this whole exhibition in it, and that's exactly what we did. In early 2022, we published Immigrant, from the post-war Netherlands to Canada in 21 paintings by Rosemary Sloat. It's a beautifully produced book. It's got all the paintings from the exhibition, but it's also got the notes that Rosemary wrote, and 4 independent essays that analyze the exhibition from different points of view, from the art point of view, from the immigrant point of view, from a symbolic point of view. And then there's, you heard about the emotional openings and the emotional showings. There's photographs from a number of those showings in the book. The book we printed in a very limited edition, and it's not available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's only available through DutchTheMedia.com, and it's really a beautiful book. I think it really represents Rosemary's exhibition in a wonderful way. And I said I'd bought a painting, and if I can just talk very briefly about the painting I bought. It's called oliestel, which is Dutch for petroleum stove or paraffin stove, and it shows in its center, very detailed, very realistic, a 1950s, 1940s, 1950s petroleum cooking stove. It's almost like a hot plate, but then that burns petroleum. You could put one pot on it, and they used it. They brought it with them from Holland, and that's where part of the symbolism comes in as well. It says on the front, in very clear letters, "Made in Holland," which is a sort of reference to Rosemary herself, who was also made in Holland.
And so this was sort of an iconic item that would be in the kitchen that seemed like an essential to take to Canada. We will use this. We will always use this item. And so, of course, it came here and became part of life.
And it did, yeah. And it's the center of the picture. But in the background, what you see is a Canadian mailbox. And there's handwriting also behind the picture, which has a quote from a letter that Rosemary's mother had written home. And if I can just read from Rosemary's note with the painting. She says, the backdrop for the stove is the view from our country home in Boston, Ontario, showing our mailbox along the road. The text was sourced from the back of a family photograph taken in the yard on a Sunday, and the particular snapshot was sent to my grandparents, and all the family would have seen it. It was written on June 20, 1955, my mother's 39th birthday, 3 years after our departure, with the message, and this is where it gets important, with the message, "Do you see our mailbox on the road? If it is at a right angle, there's mail in it." A very brief, this is Rosemary speaking again, a very brief, understated message that concealed a wall of homesickness and longing for mail at the very least. And in the picture, it's clear that the mailbox is empty. What you also see is a dense pine forest behind it, showing how isolated they felt. So the reason I brought this painting up, and all the other paintings in the exhibition have the same symbolism, but there's just a layered symbolism in the paintings that if you look at them, you begin to understand
how it felt
the
to be
hardship
that
and the
immigrant,
loneliness
how it felt to be
they
that
had.
in that era. Wow, that is fascinating.
So I just wanted to share that. Also share that in Rosemary's book, of course, I mentioned, and in my own book, I also have an analysis of the exhibition, and then, of course, the story of 43 essays about immigration from the Netherlands to North America, essentially. So a lot of this in much, much more detail than we can.
Oh, this was a good
achieve
start,
in a
Tom.
half-hour
Thank you so
podcast.
much. Thanks to Rosemary, and thank you for tuning in again this week. Don't forget, I would encourage you, take a look at the contact info that we'll put up here on the board right now. Reach out to us with your stories, with your ideas, and reactions to what you've heard today. We'd love to hear from you. Tom, thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time here on Dutch.
See you next time. Yeah. Bye.